Hey, what's up, YouTubers? It's me again, Brian, aka Gamer, excuse me, Gamer 55551, and I am back with a video review. And for this review, we're going to be taking a look at, the remake of Resident Evil 2 for the PlayStation 4, also available on the Xbox One and the PC via Steam. But for this review, we'll be looking at the PS4 version, base PS4 version to be exact. And if you're interested in any gameplay footage or me playing the game, though, I'll have a link in the description below and you can check that out. For me, the first time I played Resident Evil 2 was back in 1999 when the game was ported over to the Nintendo 64. Obviously, the game came out back in 1998 for the PlayStation, but at the time, I didn't have a PlayStation. I had an N64. I didn't get a PlayStation until a little bit later. And it was handled by the studio, Aulx Studios, that would be purchased by Rockstar that would later do, the Red Dead Revolver game. And while the port wasn't 100% perfect, the cutscenes were a little grainy though, it was still a pretty amazing port of that game. And the thing about that one is that that's the first time I got into the Resident Evil series, though. I'm not perfect at those survival horror games or anything like that, but it was a series that caught my attention, and I eventually picked up, the original Resident Evil, basically the director's cut version released on the PlayStation 3, Code Veronica, and of course Resident Evil 4, which still remains one of my favorite entries into the Resident Evil series though. But Resident Evil 2 has a place in a lot of gamers' heart, as many consider that their favorite. So it was kind of interesting hearing a couple years ago that Capcom was looking at basically remaking the classic Resident Evil 2. Now, they have remade Resident Evil games before. One of the most famous ones, of course, was the remake of the original Resident Evil released back on the GameCube back in 2002. So I was a little curious about how this one was going to look and play. I never got a chance to try the demo out, and based on one of the previews that they showed off, I liked what I've seen. And after getting my hands on the game, including doing the second run at this time and beating one of the campaigns, Leon campaign, I honestly have to say that as far as a remake goes, this is definitely good. This is really, really good. So why don't we get started with the pros and the cons, and we'll start off first with the pros. And the first one we'll have to say is the visuals. I honestly have to say the game looks good. Even on a base PS4, it looks impressive though. The visual looks on the characters to the enemies look great. A lot of the areas has really good details. It's really neat to see how the game runs, especially since this runs on the Resident Evil engine, the same engine that powered Resident Evil 7, a game that obviously brought that series back to its roots. So from a visual standpoint, it's basically a reimagination of the Resident Evil 2 games, but only better. And I definitely love the visuals and the style to the game. Next thing I want to talk about is the gameplay, and the gameplay is definitely solid and so forth. So basically it follows the over-the-shoulder approach that you see in most third-person shooters and so on, but for the most part it's still a Resident Evil game, and it still follows that survival horror route where you basically want to try to conserve your ammo and so forth, to even adding certain elements like, say, mixing gunpowder together, which was first introduced in Resident Evil 3 and so on. So it's basically a mixture of some of the stuff from the old Resident Evil, such as the survival horror part, and the new Resident Evil with the over-the-shoulder type of approach. And so the gameplay is a mixture of that, and I think it's solid. I think the gunplay is fun, and it is enjoyable though, but it still follows that, conserve your ammo and so forth, though. Even if you're playing it on easy difficulty, you still want to try to conserve your ammo in a way. And last but not least though, even though the game, even though this is a remake, and even though there is similarities to the classic 1998 Resident Evil 2, where in this case you have, the second one, which is basically after you complete the main campaign, or as I either call it, or I think it's often referred to as Campaign A. You get Second Run, which is Campaign B. Still, it feels like a brand new game. I mean, yes, you meet the doomed police officer. You meet him, you have a bit more of a conversation than you did in the old Resident Evil 2 game, and you ultimately see what happens to him. Obviously, you do see what happens to him in the old Resident Evil 2 game, but a little bit different though. To basically confronting some of the enemies like Lickers, which are a little bit more challenging this time than they were in the old Resident Evil 2, where if you tiptoe quietly, they listen to sounds, so you gotta be very careful, make too loud of a noise and they will attack you, to even confronting Mr. X, Tyrant himself, so, and to even right down to even going after some of the zombies, which take a bit, if you're going to go after them, take a bit more shots than they used to. So even though it is a remake, it feels like a whole new game. Also meeting the gun shop owner, bit different than it is in the classic 1998 Resident Evil 2. So overall, it's a remake, but I love the fact that it feels like a brand new game. This is the Resident Evil 2 remake feels like a brand new game. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to get to part 2, which are the cons. So take a little bit of a break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 2 of our video review of the Resident Evil 2 remake for the PlayStation 4, also on Xbox One and PC and Steam. So now that I gave you the pros, why don't we get started with the cons? And there are 3 cons I could think of, though not huge cons that ruin the game overall. There's just some that I don't 100% agree with, though. So let's start with the first one. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the pros, when I talked about the gameplay, it mixes a mixture of a lot of the old and new Resident Evil game, and that certainly isn't a bad thing and all. And I'm glad the game returns back to its, like survival horror roots, something was lacking from Resident Evil 5 and 6 for that matter. That said, there are certain things I am not a huge fan that they brought back that I thought was a little bit annoying. One of those is the item box. I'm not really a big fan of the item box. I don't like the idea of having to run back and forth to pick up stuff and, or drop off stuff and all. I prefer the kind of approach that was in, say, Resident Evil 4, which I still consider that my favorite Resident Evil game. The way it had it set up with the suitcase to, rearrange some stuff, not only to expand upon it and so forth. So if there's one area I don't like that I'm not really a big fan that they brought back, it is the item box. So you can expand your inventory in terms of what items you could carry with you when you pick up a whole bunch of I think hip pouches or something like that. You could do that to expand how many more items you can carry, though. Still, I'm just not a huge fan of the item box. I just don't like them. I just wish they went with the kind of item management set up like they did in Resident Evil 4. The next thing I want to talk about is the knife. Before Resident Evil 4, the knife was, let's just say it was sort of it was used as sort of like a last defense, but overall it was often referred to as being sort of a joke, being useless. It can't really do anything and all that stuff. And while the knife in Resident Evil 2 is by all means not useless, though, I don't like the idea of it breaking after a certain amount of use. I understand some will say that this adds to the bit of the survival horror element, and that may be true, but still, I just prefer, like I said before, how they use the knife in Resident, like I said with the item box, like how they used in Resident Evil 4, where you can actually break and open some stuff and so forth, and it can be used to even take out certain enemies as well. I mean, it basically served a bigger purpose in that game. This one, a little bit more than the classic Resident Evil games, though, but still, I'm not a big fan of the way they have the knife in this game, especially it breaks after a certain amount of use, though. Although I do like the fact that if for some reason you're getting about to be eaten by enemy, you can use it as sort of a last-minute defense. This is very similar to how they did in the original Resident Evil remake on the GameCube. That was like ported over to PS3 and PS4 and Xbox and Xbox 360. And last but not least is Tyrant, or Mr. X, though. One of the things I noticed that they did with the Resident Evil 2 remake, and I'm sure most of you noticed right now, is Tyrant, though. And boy, did they made some changes for this one. This guy takes elements like from the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, though. He still walks. You can still outmaneuver him, unlike Nemesis that runs, though. But he can walk fast and he can hit hard. And the thing is that he is like this invisible person. It's like determining, like stalking you if you're not careful. You could take him, you can knock him down, which will give you some room to escape from him and all that stuff. But it will only slow him down. It won't stop him or anything like that. In other words, Mr. X is not like the Tyrants from the classic Resident Evil 2 game. They overhauled him, and he certainly provides a challenge. That said, at the same time, it can also lead to some frustrating moments as well, because if you're trying to do like a puzzle or so forth, then you have Mr. X pretty much stalking you right out of the gate. On top of that, although he won't go into certain rooms, like certain save rooms and so forth, running into the main hallway, even though it has the item box and typewriter, won't work anymore because he'll come down there as well. So that won't work either, though. And so you have to sort of like hide into a safe room and so forth, which if you're trying to do a puzzle and so on, that could be a bit of an issue, because then you have to run back to the safe room or in a room he won't come in, listen to those thumping of his until you know for certain then he's gone, and run back to the room, hopefully not running into him in any way. So he provides a challenge, but it could lead to some frustrated moments at the same time, and I've ran into that with Mr. X, or Tyrant as they call him. So it's both frustrated, it could be frustrated, but provides sort of a challenge at the same time as well. Overall, as far as a remake go, I definitely like what they did with Resident Evil 2, though. They overhauled a lot of the stuff while keeping some of the elements from the original Resident Evil 2 that made it a classic. I do love the way the game runs, especially on the Resident Evil engine. Not to mention, this is the same engine that used for Resident Evil 7 and Devil May Cry 5. And I like the fact that they mix certain elements from the old to the new Resident Evil games in here as well. So, and of course, it's great that the game feels like it's a brand new game, though. Yes, there are certain things I don't like the return of the item box and the knife breaking, but those aren't really huge cons that overall affect the game. And while Mr. X can be frustrated at times, though, as I mentioned, though, he does provide a challenge. But overall, I am very pleased with the way Resident Evil 2, the remake on the PS4, played out, and it gives me some hope of what the future of the Resident Evil series might be, to even what other games we could see run on the Resident Evil engine. Here's to hoping that perhaps Capcom will use that engine, which has been pretty impressive so far, on maybe other titles. Maybe a remake of, say, the Dino Crisis series would be nice, or maybe use it on, say, bring back the Lost Planet, though. And given how well Resident Evil 2 has received so far, here's to hoping that this will convince Capcom to maybe remake, say, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Resident Evil Code Veronica, maybe look at some of the absurd Resident Evil games and maybe run that on the Resident Evil engine, like Resident Evil Survivor from the PlayStation era to Resident Evil Dead Aim from the PS2 era, to even maybe give us an idea of what Resident Evil 8 might be. But overall, definitely a fun game. It's definitely a recommendation for those, regardless of whether you have a PS2 or an Xbox One or a PC. And I would like to end it off with the PC. I'd like to say that I gotta give credit to the PC community on how they've on the Resident Evil 2, particularly the mods. Though I'm not a PC person, I'm more of a console person, but I gotta give them credits to some of the creative mods that they put out that I've seen so far. Some of them, like replacing Leon with Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, to Tyrant, which I've seen videos ranging from him wearing like a Speedo to probably one of my favorite ones that I've seen so far, where they replace Tyrant with Thomas the Tank Engine. I mean, I gotta admit, some of that is very, very creative. So I gotta give credit to give credit to the modding community on PC, on the PC though. So kudos to you guys. You created some. Those were some very interesting mods, shall we say? Even though I'm not a PC gamer, I'm more of a console gamer. I still think that it's very impressive. Okay, this concludes this video review of Resident Evil 2, the remake for the PS4. And again, these are my opinion. What are yours? What are your thoughts about the Resident Evil 2 remake? Do you think this is a remake done right? Are you glad Capcom remade this game? Do you think this will open the door to the possibility that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis or Code Veronica could get the remake treatment? Do you think other games like, say, Dino Crisis should see how they can make that game running off the Resident Evil engine? Do you like what I said in this video? Do you not like what I said? Do you have a difference of opinion? As always, sound off on the comment section below. Let me know what you think, and I hope you hit that like button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, make sure you hit the bell. Hope you hit the bell icon for notifications of any new videos I put up. Also, feel free to share this video if you want to, and feel free to donate to my channel if you like. You could do it through PayPal me or Patreon. Links will be in the description of this video. And I will see you again next time when I do another video. Hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, from Southern California, wish you all a good evening then. Bye!